Hey guys, tonight we're going to dim the lights and drift back in time. Not to the bustling streets of medieval Europe, but to a different kind of ambition. One that echoed through the very foundations of human endeavor. Forget the romanticized images of stained glass and soaring spires. Tonight, we're slipping into the dust and sweat of a construction site that lasted not months, but centuries. We're going to explore why building a cathedral in the Middle Ages sucked. You might think your latest home renovation project is tough, but trust me, after tonight, laying a single brick will feel like a vacation. You'll probably decide you wouldn't last a week on one of these projects. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from tonight, and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine yourself waking up, not to the gentle chime of your phone in a quiet suburb of Portland, Oregon, but to the distant rhythmic clang of a hammer against stone, or the groan of a timber being hauled. It's still dark, the air damp and cold. Perhaps in a makeshift hut outside the burgeoning walls of a massive construction site in what would one day become a vibrant city like Washington, D.C., or a historic town like St. Augustine, Florida. Your sleep, brief and often interrupted by the gnawing anxieties of the next day, is over. Your day of endless back-breaking toil has begun. This is the pervasive, inescapable reality of the stone's heavy whisper. Endless labor, where your very existence is defined by a relentless cycle of physical exertion, a monumental task stretching beyond your lifetime, all for the glory of a god whose dwelling would outlive generations of builders. You're a stone mason, perhaps, or a simple laborer, one of hundreds, if not thousands, working on a project of unimaginable scale. This isn't a small church in a quiet New England village. This is a towering aspiration, a divine ambition rendered in stone. Think of the sheer audacity to erect a structure that would dominate the skyline for centuries, dwarfing every other building, a man-made mountain reaching for the heavens. And you, a mere speck in this grand design, are one of the cogs in this colossal machine. The project might begin with generations of masons, carpenters, and laborers, just like your great-grandparents might have laid the first foundations of a family farm in rural Ohio, unaware of the vast labor involved. Your first duty, after a meager breakfast of stale bread and weak ale, is to walk to the quarry, often miles away, to begin cutting stone. Imagine trekking through muddy fields or treacherous forests, your muscles already stiff from the previous day's exertions. There are no heavy-duty trucks or specialized machinery like the giant excavators you might see on a modern construction site in Houston. Texas. Every block of stone, from the smallest ashlar to the colossal foundation stones, must be quarried by hand. You wield heavy picks and chisels, striking against the unyielding rock, day after day, your hands calloused and bleeding, your back protesting with every swing. The dust from the stone fills your lungs, a constant irritant that settles deep, a silent killer that will claim many lives long before the last spire's capped. Once the stone is cut, the real misery begins transportation. Imagine dragging or rolling massive blocks, weighing hundreds, if not thousands, of pounds, across uneven terrain. You use ropes, crude wooden rollers, and sheer brute force, often pulling alongside dozens of your comrades, straining with every step. The work is slow, dangerous, and utterly exhausting. A single misstep, a snapped rope, or a shifting stone could crush a limb, or worse, end a life. And this process repeats, day after day, week after week, for decades. It's like trying to build the Hoover Dam using only hand tools and the strength of human muscles. A truly mind-boggling scale of effort that makes your daily commute feel like a leisurely stroll. A common historical truth is that the construction of medieval cathedrals spanned decades, often centuries, requiring continuous, generations-long labor from highly skilled artisans, and countless laborers, reflecting both the immense scale of the projects and the limitations of medieval technology. The sheer volume of stone quarried and transported manually for a single large cathedral was staggering. Historians still widely debate the precise logistics and efficiency of quarrying and transporting such massive quantities of stone across varied terrains using only medieval tools and animal power, leaving much to theoretical reconstruction rather than direct historical accounts of the minute-by-minute struggle. Once the stone arrives at the construction site, the work shifts from quarrying to shaping. You, as a mason, begin to carve the rough blocks into precise shapes: keystones, arches, decorative elements, and structural components. This requires immense skill, patience, and an unwavering eye. You use mallets and chisels, slowly chipping away at the stone, following the designs laid out by the master builder. Each strike of the chisel reverberates through your arms, leading to constant aches and pains, and the risk of a misstruck blow causing irreparable damage to the stone, or worse, to your own hand. This isn't just physical labor, it's an intricate dance between strength and precision, where every detail matters. It's like trying to build a perfectly symmetrical, multi-story Lego castle, but with real, unforgiving stone. And if you mess up, someone might lose a finger. Then comes the lifting. Imagine hoisting massive beams of timber and heavy blocks of stone hundreds of feet into the air. There are no cranes like the towering machines that dot the skyline of modern Chicago, Illinois. Instead, you use rudimentary wooden scaffolding, ropes, pulleys, and enormous treadmills powered by human or animal labor. You might be one of several men walking inside a giant wooden wheel, turning it slowly, painstakingly, to lift a single heavy object. The heights are terrifying, the grip precarious, and the risk of falling ever present. One slip, one frayed rope, and gravity claims its due, sending stone, timber, and often human lives plummeting to the ground below. The constant fear of heights, the dizzying prospect of looking down from hundreds of feet, adds another layer of mental strain to the already exhausting physical demands. The work is relentless, spanning from sunup to sundown, often 6 days a week, with Sunday as your only day of rest, if even that is guaranteed. There are no coffee breaks, no lunch hours like the ones you might enjoy in a modern office building in New York City. Meals are eaten quickly, on site, often cold and meager, fuel for the next bout of labor. The seasons bring no respite. In winter, you work in the bitter cold, your fingers numb, the stone biting at your flesh. In summer, the sun beats down relentlessly, causing sweat to sting your eyes and dehydration to threaten your consciousness. The wind howls through the unfinished arches, and the rain turns the construction site into a treacherous, muddy pit. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed detail about the stone's heavy whisper. Endless labor is the curious phenomenon of the apprentice's silent curse, where, particularly in large, generations-long projects, young apprentices, frustrated by their endless, seemingly menial tasks like carrying water or mixing mortar, and the strict, often arbitrary, discipline of their masters, would sometimes subtly embed small, almost imperceptible flaws or mismatches in the most obscure parts of the masonry. Tiny acts of rebellion that would be invisible to the casual observer, but served as a private, enduring testament to their resentment, transforming their mundane labor into a secret canvas for their frustration. Imagine yourself, a teenage apprentice in a grand cathedral project in medieval England, painstakingly carving a minor unseen decorative element high up in a remote corner, and deliberately adding a tiny, almost imperceptible asymmetry or slightly crooked line. Knowing that this minuscule imperfection, your silent protest, would remain embedded in the stone for centuries. A secret shout against the endless, repetitive tasks. It truly sucked to have your only outlet for frustration be to subtly mess up a building that would last 1,000 years. The sheer repetitive nature of the tasks is mind-numbing. You perform the same motions day after day, week after week, year after year. The scale of the project means that you might spend your entire working life on a single cathedral, seeing only a small section completed in your lifetime. Your great-grandfather might have laid the first stones, and your grandchildren might be the ones to finally place the last capstone. This generational commitment, while noble in historical retrospect, meant a life of continuous grinding labor with little personal gratification or completion within your own lifespan. The psychological toll is immense. The constant physical demands, the ever-present danger, and the monotonous nature of the work combine to erode your spirit. You live with a pervasive sense of weariness. Your dreams often filled with the clanging of hammers and the groaning of stone. There's little room for personal aspirations, for leisure, or for mental stimulation beyond the immediate demands of the task at hand. Your identity becomes intertwined with the cathedral itself, a living component of its construction, yet utterly replaceable. The pervasive exhaustion and mental strain aren't just uncomfortable. They are insidious enemies that weaken your body and mind. Your immune system, constantly under duress from lack of sleep and poor nutrition, a hint of what's to come in a later chapter, is compromised. You become more susceptible to every passing cough, every cold, every disease that sweeps through the close quarters of the worker camps. A simple ailment that a well-fed, well-rested person might shake off in a day or two can drag on for weeks, debilitating you, making you even less efficient, and putting your tenuous livelihood at risk. It's a vicious cycle where the very act of surviving makes you more vulnerable to the next threat. A struggle similar to the early American settlers building their first towns in the harsh wilderness of Virginia, or the rigorous construction of the early Erie Canal in New York. So, as you settle into your own comfortable home tonight, perhaps after a day of work that involved more brainpower than brute force, take a moment to appreciate the sheer ease of modern construction, the safety regulations, and the finite nature of most projects. The grand cathedrals, standing majestically across Europe, are not just architectural marvels. They are monuments to an era of unimaginable human labor, built on the sweat, blood, and enduring spirit of individuals who toiled relentlessly, often without recognition. Their lives defined by the stone's heavy whisper. Rest well, knowing that your next home improvement project will likely involve power tools in a much shorter timeline. A true luxury born from centuries of hard-won progress. Let's gently return from the relentless, soul-crushing toil of the stone's heavy whisper. Endless labor went where we saw how every waking hour was consumed by unimaginable physical exertion, year after year. If Chapter 1 explored the what of their labor, tonight we'll delve into the where and how, the truly terrifying environment that was the medieval construction site. We're going to explore the grim reality of beneath the mason's boot, hazardous conditions, where every step was a gamble, every task fraught with peril, and where injury, dismemberment, or even death were not just possibilities, but almost inevitable rites of passage for anyone involved in building these colossal structures. Imagine yourself, now a young apprentice, perhaps barely out of your teens, having left your small, humble village in rural Pennsylvania to seek work on the grand cathedral project in Salisbury, England, or if we imagine it in a nascent American context, a similarly ambitious early colonial church being built in what would become Boston, Massachusetts. You stand at the base of the towering scaffolding, looking up hundreds of feet into the sky. The sheer height makes your head spin. There are no hard hats, no safety harnesses, no steel-toed boots like the protective gear you might wear on a modern construction site in Dallas. Texas, your only protection is your wits, your agility, and the frayed ropes and rickety timbers that comprise the temporary structure around you. This is the pervasive, bone-chilling reality of beneath the mason's boot. Hazardous conditions where the very air you breathe is thick with dust and danger, and the ground beneath your feet feels perpetually unstable. One of the most immediate and terrifying dangers is falling from height. Imagine working on scaffolding hundreds of feet above the ground, sometimes in high winds or in the pouring rain. The planks beneath your feet are often rough, uneven, and lashed together with ropes that could fray at any moment. You carry heavy stones, climb ladders slick with mud, and swing hammers with precision, all while balancing precariously. A sudden gust of wind, a misplaced foot, a rotten plank. Any of these could send you plummeting to your death, your body shattering on the unforgiving ground below. The master builders and foremen, positioned safely on the ground, often seemed indifferent to these daily perils, viewing casualties as an unfortunate but unavoidable cost of progress. It's like being a tightrope walker but blindfolded, carrying a heavy load, and performing in a hurricane. A truly horrifying daily commute. Beyond the falls, there's the constant threat of falling objects. Imagine working below a team of masons high above, as they chip away at stone or hoist massive blocks. A dropped tool, a loose piece of debris, or a stone accidentally dislodged could fall at incredible speeds, striking you with lethal force. There's no safety netting or hard hat zone like the designated areas on a modern construction site in Los Angeles. California, you simply rely on quick reflexes and a prayer. Many workers bore the scars of near misses, or witnessed firsthand the brutal impact of a falling object on a colleague, turning every upward glance into a moment of silent dread. It's like playing dodgeball, but the balls are made of solid rock and are falling from a skyscraper, making you constantly jumpy. Then consider the hazards of the tools themselves. You wield heavy hammers, sharp chisels, axes, and saws, all by hand, day in and day out. There are no power tools, no electric saws with safety guards. A single slip of a hand, a moment of fatigue, and a chisel could slice deep into your flesh, severing fingers or mangling a hand. A hammer could miss its mark and smash a thumb. Infections, in an era before modern medicine, were a constant, terrifying follow-up to any injury. A simple cut could fester, turn gangrenous, and lead to amputation. Or worse, blood poisoning, which often meant a slow, agonizing death. These were not minor injuries, they were life-altering or life-ending events that transformed healthy young men into crippled beggars overnight. A common historical truth is that medieval cathedral construction sites were incredibly dangerous, characterized by frequent accidents from falls, falling objects, and injuries from rudimentary tools. Without modern safety regulations, protective equipment, or medical care, the mortality and injury rates among workers were exceptionally high, making such labor a high-risk endeavor. Historians still widely debate the precise number of lives lost during the construction of specific cathedrals, as detailed records of worker deaths or long-term injury tracking are rare, making it challenging to quantify the true human cost beyond anecdotal evidence and general observations of the period. The sheer weight and size of the materials posed another profound danger. As we touched on in Chapter 1, moving those massive stones and timbers required immense brute force. Imagine trying to maneuver a multi-ton block of stone into place, relying only on ropes, levers, and the coordinated strength of dozens of men. A sudden shift, a loss of footing, and a limb could be crushed or your entire body pinned beneath the weight. Many masons bore the scars of crushed fingers, broken bones, or permanently damaged spines from years of lifting and moving these colossal materials. The physical toll was not just about fatigue. It was about chronic injury and gradual bodily destruction. It's like trying to lift a car by hand every day. Eventually, your body just gives out. The environmental hazards were equally brutal. Dust from the stone filled the air, constantly inhaled, leading to chronic lung diseases like silicosis, a slow and agonizing suffocation that often manifested years after the initial exposure. This mason's lung was a common affliction, a silent killer that claimed many lives long after their work on the cathedral was done. Imagine constantly breathing in fine, abrasive particles, slowly turning your lungs into stone. The cold, damp conditions of winter led to frostbite, pneumonia, and debilitating arthritis, while the intense summer heat caused heat stroke and dehydration. The construction site was an open-air factory of human suffering, exposed to the whims of nature with little protection. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about beneath the mason's boot. Hazardous conditions is the curious phenomenon of the ritual of the first fall, where, on particularly large or high cathedral projects, an unwritten grim tradition sometimes emerged among the laborers when the first major, fatal fall occurred from a significant height. It was often met with a moment of stunned silence, then a superstitious, almost accepting murmur among the remaining workers, believing that the site had claimed its first offering. A chillingly pragmatic way to cope with the almost inevitable casualties that were expected as the project grew taller, turning a tragic death into a grim, almost sacred validation of the project's dangerous scale. Imagine yourself a young, trembling apprentice on the towering scaffolding of a nascent cathedral in medieval France, hearing the horrifying scream and subsequent sickening thud as a fellow worker plummets from above, then witnessing the eerie, almost detached, reaction of the hardened masons around you, a silent nod of grim acceptance, a moment that would haunt your dreams for years, a truly disturbing initiation into the brutal realities of the job. It truly sucked to have to accept that your workplace expected you to die, and that your death was just a statistical inevitability. Beyond the direct physical dangers, there was the constant threat of disease and infection. Living in crowded, often unsanitary worker camps, much like the cramped conditions we discussed in Chapter 2, but on an even larger scale meant that diseases spread like wildfire. A small cut, if not properly treated, and proper treatment was largely unavailable, could lead to a fatal infection, dysentery, influenza, and other infectious diseases could sweep through the workforce, debilitating or killing dozens, halting work, and adding to the climate of fear. There were no modern hospitals, no antibiotics like the miracle drugs you can get at any pharmacy in a modern American city like Miami, Florida. Medical care was rudimentary at best, often involving superstitious remedies or painful, ineffective procedures. The psychological toll of this constant exposure to danger was immense. You lived with a pervasive sense of dread, always aware that your life could end in an instant, or that a single mistake could leave you crippled and dependent. You saw your colleagues maimed, injured, and killed, often in gruesome ways. This constant exposure to suffering, combined with the lack of safety measures and the indifference of those in authority, eroded your sense of security and fostered a deep, simmering resentment. There was little hope for redress, no workers' compensation, no legal recourse for injuries sustained on the job. You were simply replaced, another body to be put to work on the colossal project. Even the simplest tasks were fraught with danger. Mixing mortar involved working with caustic lime, which could cause severe burns to the skin and eyes. Excavating foundations meant dealing with unstable earth, the risk of cave-ins, and the arduous task of moving tons of soil by hand, often in precarious trenches. Working with molten lead for roofing or stained glass involved the risk of severe burns and lead poisoning, a slow, neurological deterioration. Every aspect of the work, from the ground up to the highest spire, presented its own unique set of perils, making the entire construction process a continuous dance with death. Much like the perilous early days of the Californian gold rush or the treacherous construction of the Transcontinental Railroad, where every mile of track was paid for in blood and sweat. The legacy of beneath the mason's boot hazardous conditions is a stark reminder of the immense human cost behind the architectural marvels of the Middle Ages. These cathedrals, standing majestically today, are not just testaments to faith and engineering, but also silent memorials to the countless lives lost and bodies broken in their construction. They underscore the profound advancements in workplace safety, medical care, and labor rights that we enjoy today. Advancements that often stemmed from the tragic lessons learned on sites just like these. So, as you look at any grand, historic building, remember the unseen dangers and the forgotten sacrifices that laid its very foundations. Let's gently return from the terrifying, bone-chilling reality of beneath the mason's boot hazardous conditions, where every step on a medieval construction site was a gamble with life and limb. If Chapter 2 explored the physical dangers, tonight we'll delve into the less visible, yet equally oppressive, forces that dictated the lives of these builders, the absolute power structures that governed their every move. We're going to explore the stifling reality of the master builder's whip, brutal hierarchy, where individual will was systematically crushed beneath the grand vision of the cathedral, and every worker was merely a cog in a vast, unforgiving machine, stripped of personal autonomy. Imagine yourself, now, a skilled stone carver, perhaps a master of your craft, having honed your skills over decades, passed down through generations in your family, from the ancient quarries of Vermont to the burgeoning towns of Massachusetts. You are working on the intricate facade of a colossal cathedral, one that might rival the scale of the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., or a grand early colonial basilica in New Orleans, Louisiana. You possess immense talent, an artistic eye, and the physical prowess to bring stone to life. Yet, for all your skill, you are not truly free. You are bound by the absolute authority of a man whose vision is paramount, whose word is law, and whose influence extends to every chisel stroke, every block placed. This is the pervasive, soul-crushing reality of the master builder's whip. Brutal hierarchy, where your creativity is merely a tool, and your individuality is subservient to an overarching, inflexible design. At the very apex of this brutal hierarchy stands the master builder, or magister operas. This is not just an architect. This is the supreme commander of the entire enterprise, a figure of immense power and often unquestioned authority. They conceptualized the grand design, managed the vast resources, and oversaw every aspect of the construction, from the quarrying of stone to the placement of the last gargoyle. Their word was final, their decisions absolute. Imagine a modern CEO, an engineering genius, and a dictatorial general all rolled into one. They were often educated men, sometimes even clerics, and who had studied geometry, engineering, and the principles of architecture from ancient texts. Their artistic vision, however brilliant, often came at the cost of immense human suffering. They dictated the pace, the techniques, and the exact specifications, often with little regard for the practical difficulties or the well-being of the workers. Their whip, though often metaphorical, was ever present in the fear they inspired. Beneath the master builder came the master masons and master carpenters. These were highly skilled craftsmen, each leading their own specialized teams. They translated the master builder's grand designs into tangible instructions, supervised the day-to-day work, and were responsible for the quality and efficiency of their respective sections. While they held authority over the journeymen and apprentices, they themselves were still very much under the thumb of the master builder. They were expected to enforce strict discipline, ensuring that quotas were met, and that the work adhered precisely to the master plan. A master mason might be a highly respected figure in his craft, capable of incredible feats of engineering, but he could still be reprimanded, fined, or even dismissed by the master builder for any perceived deviation or delay. Much like a project manager in a large, complex modern construction firm in New York City, whose career rests entirely on the successful execution of the CEO's vision, further down the chain were the journeymen. These were skilled, experienced workers who had completed their apprenticeships and traveled from site to site. Offering their expertise, they worked directly under the master masons and carpenters, executing the more complex tasks. They had a degree of autonomy in their specific craft, but they were still bound by the rigid rules of the site. They were expected to work tirelessly, their skill their only bargaining chip, constantly seeking to impress their superiors to maintain employment on these prestigious, albeit brutal, projects. Their movement from job to job, from a cathedral in Chartres to one in Durham, or, in our imagined American setting, from an ambitious colonial church in Plymouth to a fortified mission in Spanish California, gave them a slight sense of independence. but only within the confines of the same demanding industry. And at the very bottom, forming the vast majority of the workforce, were the apprentices and unskilled laborers. Apprentices were often young boys, indentured to a master mason or carpenter for many years, learning the trade through grueling, often repetitive tasks. They carried tools, mixed mortar, hauled water, and endured harsh discipline, often living in cramped, unsanitary conditions with their masters or in communal barracks. Unskilled laborers, often drawn from the local peasantry, performed the most physically demanding and dangerous tasks: quarrying, hauling, digging foundations, and operating crude machinery. They had no specific craft, no real bargaining power, and were easily replaceable. Their lives were cheap, their bodies expendable, their labor valued only for its raw output. Their daily existence was a stark testament to the lack of dignity afforded to the lowest rung of this hierarchy. Far worse than a temporary day laborer on a modern landscaping crew in suburban Ohio, who at least has basic rights and safety nets. A common historical truth is that medieval cathedral construction operated under a rigid hierarchical structure, with the master builder holding supreme authority, followed by master craftsmen, journeymen, and unskilled laborers, each with clearly defined roles and limited autonomy. This structure was essential for coordinating such massive long-term projects, but often came at the expense of individual worker well-being and personal freedom. Historians still widely debate the precise mechanisms of control and disciplinary measures employed by master builders, as explicit written records outlining these daily interactions are rare, leaving much to interpretation about the psychological impact of such intense top-down management. The control exercised by the master builder and his senior staff was absolute. There were no labor unions, no workers' rights, no concept of workplace protection like the OSHA regulations you might find on a modern construction site in Phoenix. Arizona. Discipline was harsh and immediate. A mistake, a delay, or even a perceived act of insubordination could result in a beating, a fine taken directly from already meager wages. Remember Chapter 4, or outright dismissal, leaving a worker destitute and without prospects. The fear of punishment, of starvation, or of becoming a crippled beggar ensured almost complete obedience. This system fostered an atmosphere of constant anxiety, where every worker was acutely aware of their precarious position and the immense power wielded by those above them. Communication flowed almost exclusively downwards. Orders were given, not discussed. Critiques were delivered, not debated. The master builder's vision was paramount, and individual creative input, especially from lower-ranking workers, was rarely tolerated. Even skilled masons, though masters of their craft, were expected to execute the design precisely as dictated, with little room for personal artistic expression, unless it was in a very minor unseen detail. Their hands were extensions of the master builder's will, their bodies merely tools to realize his grand design. This constant suppression of individual agency, this demand for unthinking execution, was profoundly dehumanizing. The system also fostered a climate of surveillance. Foremen and master craftsmen constantly monitored the work, ensuring efficiency and adherence to standards. Any slacking, any deviation, any sign of dissent would be quickly reported up the chain of command. This omnipresent oversight created a sense of being perpetually watched, further eroding personal freedom and encouraging meticulous adherence to duty. It's like being under constant observation by a strict, ever-present supervisor, with no moment of true respite or personal space. A fascinating yet rarely discussed detail about the master builder's whip. Brutal hierarchy is the curious phenomenon of the silent correction, where a master builder, instead of verbally reprimanding a journeyman for a subtle technical error, would often deliberately walk past the flawed work, then return to it a few moments later with a single precise tap of his hammer, or a subtle, almost imperceptible adjustment of a string line, leaving the journeyman to silently recognize and correct his mistake without a single word being exchanged. Turning a public teaching moment into a chilling, almost psychic, display of authority, and unspoken expectation. Imagine yourself, a seasoned journeyman mason on the scaffolding of a towering Gothic cathedral in Cologne, or a budding one in colonial New York, having just laid a complex piece of tracery, feeling the master builder's silent, almost invisible presence behind you, and then, without a word, noticing his single pointed tap on a slightly misaligned stone, a silent command that sent a shiver down your spine, but also a profound respect for his unnerving precision. It truly sucked to be corrected by a single silent tap, knowing your mistake was so obvious to your superior that words weren't even necessary. The hierarchy extended beyond the work itself into the daily lives of the workers. Living arrangements. Food rations often meager, as we saw in Chapter 5, and even social interactions were often dictated by one's place in the pecking order. Senior craftsmen might have slightly better housing or more substantial meals, while unskilled laborers might be relegated to the poorest, most dangerous conditions. This constant reinforcement of status, even outside of working hours, meant there was little escape from the hierarchical pressures. Your position within the construction crew determined your entire existence, mirroring the feudal societal structure of the wider medieval world, much like the rigid social strata that defined early American plantations, or the strict divisions within pioneer wagon trains heading west. The sheer length of these projects, spanning generations, meant that the hierarchy was a constant, unchanging force in many workers' lives. An apprentice might become a journeyman, then perhaps a master mason, but the fundamental structure of control remained. Each generation inherited the same system, the same expectations, the same relentless demands from above. This created a sense of predestination, where individual ambition was often tempered by the overwhelming reality of the system, leaving little room for truly breaking free from the master's whip. The psychological impact of this brutal hierarchy was profound. The constant fear of punishment, the lack of autonomy, the suppression of individuality, and the pervasive sense of being a replaceable cog in a giant machine took a heavy toll on the human spirit. It fostered resentment, but also resignation. It stifled creativity and initiative, rewarding only obedience and sheer endurance. This system, designed for ultimate control and efficiency in monumental construction, inadvertently created a workforce characterized by a deep-seated, often unspoken despair, a constant gnawing feeling of powerlessness that would be completely foreign to a modern unionized worker in a manufacturing plant in Michigan. The legacy of the master builder's whip brutal hierarchy is a complex one. While it allowed for the creation of some of the most awe-inspiring architectural achievements in human history, it did so at an immense human cost. It stands as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power, the dehumanizing effects of rigid social structures, and the profound importance of individual agency and workers' rights. So, as you gaze upon a magnificent cathedral today, or even a modern skyscraper, remember the invisible whip that once guided every chisel and every hammer, and appreciate the hard-won freedoms that allow you to work, create, and simply be in a world where your individual voice matters far more than just your labor. Let's gently return from the oppressive, soul-crushing grip of the master builder's whip, brutal hierarchy, where every worker's will was subservient to a grand, inflexible design. If Chapter 3 explored the absolute power structures that governed their lives, tonight we'll delve into the cold, hard economic reality that kept them bound to this dangerous existence. We're going to explore the disheartening truth of a prayer for pennies meager pay, where even the most skilled labor was compensated with barely enough to survive. Turning every day's toil into a desperate, unending struggle against poverty and economic despair, imagine yourself, now, a young journeyman mason, perhaps having traveled from a small, struggling town in rural Pennsylvania, seeking work on the massive cathedral project in Canterbury, England, or, if we're reimagining this in an early American context, a similarly ambitious public works project like the construction of the first substantial bridge over the Delaware River, linking nascent colonial towns like Philadelphia to areas in New Jersey, You are a master of your craft, capable of shaping stone with artistry and precision. Your hands, though calloused and often bleeding, are your livelihood, your most valuable tools. Yet, for all your skill, for all the grueling hours you put in from dawn till dusk, your reward is a pittance. This is the pervasive, gnawing reality of a prayer for pennies. Meager pay, where your immense labor, your irreplaceable skill, and your very life are valued at the absolute bare minimum. Barely enough to keep you from starvation, and certainly not enough to dream of a life beyond the constant shadow of economic hardship. Let's put this into stark perspective. For a common, unskilled laborer, your daily wage might be a mere penny or two. Even a highly skilled journeyman mason might earn only a few pence a day, or perhaps a shilling or two a week, if they were lucky enough to be continuously employed. To truly grasp this, imagine if your weekly wage today, in a comfortable city like Raleigh, North Carolina, amounted to less than $5 in modern currency for a full week of intense, dangerous work, with no benefits, no sick pay, and no job security. A modern construction worker in Denver, Colorado, would earn more in an hour than these skilled craftsmen earned in a full day, and with far greater safety, the payment structure itself added to the precarity. Wages were often paid weekly, or sometimes even monthly, but not always consistently. A delay in funds from the wealthy patrons or the church could mean weeks without pay, leaving you utterly destitute. There were no direct deposit systems, no reliable banks for the common laborer like the ones you might use today in your bustling city of Houston. Texas. You carried your meager earnings in a small, often worn leather pouch, constantly vulnerable to theft or loss. Every single penny counted. Every coin was a lifeline, and the absence of even a few could plunge you into immediate crisis. It's like living perpetually on the edge of a cliff, where one gust of wind or one delayed payment could send you plummeting into financial ruin. Beyond the low wages, there was the additional burden of living costs. While some larger projects might provide communal barracks or very basic shelter on site, this was often rudimentary, cold, and unsanitary. You still had to pay for your own food, which, as we hinted at in Chapter 5, was often meager and poor in quality. Tools, though often supplied by the master, might require maintenance or replacement at your own expense. And if you had a family, your meager earnings had to stretch to support them, often necessitating sending money back to a distant village, ensuring that your own consumption was minimal to ensure their survival. This constant financial drain meant that very little, if anything, was left over for savings or for any form of personal improvement. A common historical truth is that medieval laborers, including skilled craftsmen involved in cathedral construction, generally received very low wages that often barely covered their basic subsistence needs, keeping them in a state of perpetual poverty and economic vulnerability. This limited their ability to save, invest, or improve their social standing, effectively binding them to a life of manual labor. Historians still widely debate the precise purchasing power of medieval wages and the variations across different regions and time periods, making it challenging to provide exact modern equivalents. But the consensus remains that economic hardship was the norm for the vast majority of the workforce. The system also employed fines and deductions. Adding insult to injury, if you were late for work, if you made a mistake that damaged a tool or a piece of stone, or if you were deemed insubordinate, a quick reminder of the master builder's whip from Chapter 3, you could be fined, with the amount deducted directly from your already paltry wages. These fines were often arbitrary, enforced by the master builder or foreman, and provided another layer of control and economic oppression. Imagine working a full day, only to have a significant portion of your pay disappear because a chisel slipped, or because you dared to rest for a moment too long. This constant threat of financial penalty compounded the already intense pressure to perform flawlessly, turning every task into a high-stakes gamble. It's like working at a modern company where your paycheck can be docked for any minor infraction, turning your earnings into a fragile, conditional reward. The lack of any social safety net was a brutal reality. There was no unemployment insurance, no disability benefits, no workers' compensation if you were injured on the job, a constant threat. As we explored in hazardous conditions in Chapter 2, if you became too ill or too injured to work, you were simply dismissed, left to fend for yourself, often resorting to begging or charity, or relying on the kindness of a distant family. Your livelihood, your very survival, was tied directly to your physical ability to work. And if that failed, so did you. This created a profound sense of anxiety, a constant fear of being rendered useless and discarded, a dread that a healthy, employed person in a modern American city like Boston, Massachusetts, would find utterly terrifying. Savings were an almost impossible dream for the vast majority, while some exceptional individuals, particularly those in higher skilled positions who worked consistently for decades, might manage to accumulate enough to retire or support themselves in old age. For the vast majority of journeymen, apprentices, and unskilled laborers, every penny earned was immediately spent on basic survival. There were no secure banks for the working class, no reliable investments beyond perhaps a few small coins buried in a backyard. The idea of building wealth, of leaving a significant inheritance, or of achieving true financial independence was a distant fantasy for most. It's like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom, where every drop you add immediately drains away. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed detail about a prayer for pennies. Meager pay is the curious phenomenon of the hidden coin in the mortar, where, occasionally, a journeyman mason, driven by desperation or a subtle act of symbolic protest, would secretly embed a single precious silver coin, perhaps their entire day's wage, within a section of freshly laid mortar, knowing it would be forever entombed within the cathedral's walls, a silent offering of their meager wealth to the monumental structure that consumed their lives. A bittersweet act of both sacrifice and a private, defiant claim of ownership over a tiny piece of the grand project. Imagine yourself a skilled mason in the burgeoning city of Lincoln, or a nascent colonial settlement like Jamestown. Virginia, having just received your meager day's pay, and as you lay a critical stone, you discreetly press one of your few coins into the wet mortar, knowing it will be sealed forever within the wall. A secret prayer for a better future, or perhaps a defiant, hidden middle finger to the system that underpaid you. A truly poignant and desperate gesture. It truly sucked to have your only lasting legacy be a hidden coin in a wall, a testament to your quiet desperation. The psychological impact of perpetual economic hardship was profound. The constant worry about food, shelter, and survival eroded mental well-being. It bred resentment towards the wealthy patrons and the church, who commanded such immense resources while paying so little for the labor that built their symbols of power. It fostered a sense of injustice, of being exploited, of having your immense effort devalued. This gnawing anxiety, this never-ending struggle, but was a constant companion, preventing true rest or peace of mind, leaving you in a state of quiet despair. It's a bit like living in a constant state of financial emergency, where even the smallest setback could lead to utter ruin, a far more intense pressure than paying off a student loan in modern New York City. Furthermore, the economic precarity limited personal freedom in almost every conceivable way. You couldn't simply leave a job you disliked, because unemployment meant immediate destitution, and finding another position was difficult, especially without a good reference. You were effectively tied to your employer, your daily existence a testament to economic bondage rather than willing service. Your choices were dictated not by desire or ambition, but by the relentless, unforgiving pressure of needing to earn that next penny to survive. This profound lack of financial autonomy shaped every decision, every interaction, and every hope you might harbor, turning your life into a continuous act of survival. Much like the perilous early days of the American frontier, where every meal was a hard-won victory, the enduring legacy of a prayer for pennies. Meager pay is a stark reminder of the vast economic inequalities that defined the medieval era and continued to shape societies for centuries. It highlights how the monumental architectural achievements of the past were often built on the backs of exploited labor, whose lives were valued cheaply. This historical reality underscores the profound importance of modern labor movements, fair wage standards, and the development of social safety nets that aim to ensure dignity and economic security for all workers. Whether you're working in a bustling factory in Detroit, Michigan, or a quiet office in Portland, Oregon, the silent struggle for a few extra coins by medieval cathedral builders laid a crucial, albeit painful, foundation for the labor rights and economic justice we now, largely, take for granted. Let's gently return from the crushing economic reality of A Prayer for Penny's Meager Pay, where we saw how every coin earned was a desperate battle against destitution. If Chapter 4 explored the financial chains that bound them, tonight we'll delve into an even more fundamental and often overlooked aspect of their daily suffering, the very food that was supposed to fuel their colossal labor. We're going to explore the grim truth of bread and blight, famine, and disease, where consistent, nutritious meals were a rare luxury, and the threat of starvation or widespread illness from contaminated food was a constant, terrifying companion, turning every bite into a gamble. Imagine yourself now, a young stone carver, perhaps in your early 20s, working on a grand cathedral in the heart of what would eventually become the vibrant city of Chicago, Illinois, or a significant colonial settlement like Jamestown, Virginia. Your body aches from the incessant physical demands of the stone's heavy whisper. Endless labor. Remember that brutal work from Chapter 1, and your spirit feels bruised by the hazardous conditions. Those daily threats from Chapter 2 and the brutal hierarchy, the relentless control from Chapter 3. You've managed to survive on your meager pay, the paltry sum from Chapter 4. But now, a more insidious threat emerges: hunger. This is the pervasive, often gnawing reality of bread and blight, famine and disease, where your very sustenance is precarious, and the struggle to simply eat enough to survive consumes a vast portion of your daily thought and energy. For the vast majority of medieval laborers, including those building cathedrals, the concept of a regular, balanced, and nutritious meal was a foreign one. Your diet would consist primarily of staples coarse bread, made from whatever grain was available, often rye or barley, and sometimes mixed with husks or even sawdust during times of extreme scarcity. This bread, heavy and dense, would be the foundation of almost every meal. It provided calories, but little else in terms of varied nutrients. Imagine eating a dry, bland, heavy piece of bread for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, day in and day out, for years. It's like being stuck in a perpetual, unappetizing, carb-loading diet, but without any of the actual benefits of proper nutrition. Beyond bread, your diet might include some form of pottage or gruel, a thin, watery stew made from boiled grains, sometimes with a few wild herbs or root vegetables if you were lucky. Meat was a rare luxury, usually reserved for feast days or for the master builders and senior craftsmen. If you did get meat, it was likely salted or smoked, often tough, and of the lowest quality, the undesirable cuts that the wealthy would disdain. Fresh fruits and vegetables, crucial for vitamins and minerals, were seasonal and often expensive, making them inaccessible for most laborers. Your body, already overworked, was constantly operating on a caloric deficit, leaving you perpetually hungry and utterly drained. A common historical truth is that the diet of medieval laborers was predominantly cereal-based, lacking in fresh produce, lean protein, and essential micronutrients, making them particularly vulnerable to deficiency diseases and weakening their immune systems. This inadequate nutrition directly impacted their physical strength and susceptibility to illness. Historians still widely debate the precise caloric intake and nutritional completeness of medieval diets across different social classes and regions, as detailed dietary records for individual workers are scarce, leading to generalized assumptions about their overall health and resilience based on available agricultural and food consumption data. The quality of the food was often abysmal. Grains could be infested with weevils, bread could be stale or moldy, and water sources were frequently contaminated. Imagine drinking water from a communal well that also served as a dumping ground for waste, or eating bread that tasted faintly of mildew. There were no modern food safety regulations, no health inspections like the ones you'd expect for a restaurant in a modern city like Seattle. Washington. Food spoilage was common, leading to stomach ailments, dysentery, and other debilitating illnesses that would spread rapidly through the cramped worker camps. It's a bit like playing Russian roulette with every meal, never quite knowing if the next bite will bring nourishment or severe illness. Then there was the ever-present threat of famine. Medieval society was inherently vulnerable to crop failures, caused by adverse weather, pests, or warfare. A single bad harvest could send food prices skyrocketing, putting even the meager staples out of reach for laborers. During times of famine, you might find yourself working on an empty stomach, your body screaming for sustenance, while still expected to lift heavy stones and climb dangerous scaffolding. People would resort to eating roots, bark, or whatever scraps they could find, their bodies wasting away, their strength fading with each passing day. These periods of acute hunger were not just uncomfortable, they were literal battles for survival, often resulting in widespread death. A grim reality that is almost unimaginable to someone living in a food-rich country like modern America. This constant nutritional deprivation, whether from scarcity or poor quality, had severe consequences. Your body, already pushed to its limits by endless labor, became a vulnerable host for every disease. Scurvy, caused by a lack of vitamin C found in fresh fruits and vegetables, would make your gums bleed, your teeth loosen, and old wounds reopen. Rickets, from a lack of vitamin D, would cause your bones to soften and deform. Anemia from iron deficiency would leave you perpetually exhausted, weak, and pale, exacerbating the general fatigue. These weren't just minor health inconveniences. They were debilitating, painful conditions that significantly reduced your productivity and shortened your lifespan, making you even more susceptible to the unseen illness, as we'll explore in the next chapter. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed detail about bread and blight. Famine and disease is the curious phenomenon of the forgotten kitchen garden, where, on some larger, more established cathedral sites, a few resourceful laborers, often women or older workers, would discreetly cultivate tiny, hidden patches of hardy vegetables or medicinal herbs in overlooked corners of the construction site or adjacent waste ground, turning small acts of illicit gardening into a vital, albeit precarious, source of fresh nutrients or simple remedies for their families and fellow workers, a testament to their desperate ingenuity in confronting persistent food, scarcity, and illness. Imagine yourself, a wizened old laborer on the outskirts of a bustling cathedral in Florence, Italy, or a burgeoning colonial town like Boston. Massachusetts, carefully tending a few scraggly turnip greens and a handful of feverfew plants hidden behind a pile of discarded rubble, knowing that these meager, illicit crops were the only source of fresh vitamins for your ailing family. A truly poignant act of survival and defiance against the omnipresent hunger. It truly sucked to have to secretly grow your own food just to supplement a diet that was barely keeping you alive. The psychological impact of chronic hunger and poor nutrition was profound. It affected your mood, making you irritable, lethargic, and prone to despair. The constant gnawing sensation in your stomach, the persistent weakness in your limbs, eroded your morale and made every task feel even more arduous. It fostered a deep resentment towards the wealthy patrons and clergy who feasted on abundant, rich meals while you subsisted on meager, often spoiled scraps. This stark contrast, this daily reminder of your low status and constant deprivation, was a powerful, silent form of psychological torture, far more insidious than simply having to skip a meal in modern Los Angeles. California, moreover, the collective nature of medieval life meant that disease, often linked to food and water, spread rapidly. If one worker contracted dysentery from contaminated food, it would quickly sweep through the shared living quarters. debilitating dozens and causing work to grind to a halt. Mass outbreaks were not uncommon, turning construction sites into impromptu, horrifying infirmaries. The inability to contain these outbreaks, coupled with rudimentary medical knowledge, which we'll delve into more deeply in the next chapter, meant that illnesses exacerbated by poor diet often proved fatal, adding to the grim tally of lives consumed by the cathedral. Even the seasons presented unique challenges. In winter, our fresh food was almost non-existent, and reliance on preserved, often heavily salted. Staples increased. In summer, rapid spoilage meant food could turn quickly, leading to more instances of food poisoning. The sheer unpredictability of food availability, tied directly to the success of harvests and the efficiency of local markets, added another layer of anxiety to an already precarious existence, making it difficult to plan or rely on consistent sustenance. A struggle unknown to anyone who can simply walk into a brightly lit supermarket in suburban Maryland and buy whatever they want. Whenever they want it. The legacy of bread and blight. Famine and disease is a powerful reminder of how fundamental food security and proper nutrition are to human dignity and well-being. It highlights the brutal realities faced by vast populations throughout history, where the luxury of abundant, safe, and nutritious food was reserved for a tiny elite. This historical reality underscores the immense importance of modern agriculture, food safety standards, public health initiatives, and global efforts to combat hunger, ensuring that the battles fought and lost over meager sustenance in the shadow of grand cathedrals are lessons learned, not repeated. So, as you enjoy your next meal tonight, savor every bite, and remember the countless invisible stomachs that once ached for even a single crumb of bread and blight. Let's gently return from the gnawing hunger and pervasive scarcity of bread and blight. Famine and disease wake, where every meal was a gamble and consistent nutrition a distant dream. If Chapter 5 explored the threats of inadequate sustenance, tonight we'll delve into an even more insidious, often invisible enemy that relentlessly stalked the cathedral builders. The relentless onslaught of sickness and the profound lack of effective care. We're going to explore the grim reality of the unseen illness, disease, and despair, where cramped conditions, constant physical strain, and rudimentary medical knowledge conspired to make sickness a common, often fatal, companion, claiming lives with horrifying regularity. Imagine yourself, now, a young carpenter, perhaps in your late teens or early 20s, having traveled from a struggling town in rural Kentucky, now toiling on the massive timbers of a soaring cathedral in what would become the bustling port city of Baltimore, Maryland, or a significant colonial settlement like Williamsburg. Virginia, your body is already exhausted from the stone's heavy whisper. Endless labor. Remember that brutal toil from Chapter 1. You've narrowly avoided injury from the hazardous conditions, those daily perils from Chapter 2, and you're barely surviving on your meager pay the paltry sum from Chapter 4, and scraps and scarcity the dismal food from Chapter 5. Now, you wake one morning with a pounding headache and a persistent cough, or perhaps a strange rash has appeared on your arms. You try to push through it, to ignore the chills that ripple through your body, because taking a day off is simply not an option. Your work is relentless. Your presence expected. This is the pervasive, terrifying reality of the unseen illness, disease, and despair, where your body, already weakened by endless toil and inadequate food, becomes a vulnerable host for every microbe that sweeps through the close quarters of the worker camps, making even a common cold a potential death sentence. The living conditions for medieval laborers, particularly in the temporary camps that sprang up around massive construction sites, were breeding grounds for disease. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, of workers would be crammed into small, damp, poorly ventilated barracks or makeshift huts, much like the infamous conditions of early industrial worker dormitories in Massachusetts or the crowded tenement housing of 19th century New York City. Sanitation was rudimentary at best. Latrines were often mere pits, easily overflowing and contaminating nearby water sources. Waste, both human and animal, accumulated, attracting swarms of flies and rats, which then spread pathogens. Water, if not drawn from a clean well, and often it wasn't, or became contaminated quickly, could be teeming with bacteria. It was a literal petri dish where diseases could spread with alarming speed and efficiency, far faster than gossip through a small town in rural Mississippi. Typhus and typhoid fever were particularly rampant. Typhus often spread by lice, those unwelcome companions that thrived in unwashed bodies and cramped conditions, would cause high fevers, severe headaches, rashes, and extreme weakness, often leading to delirium and death. Typhoid, spread through contaminated food and water, would bring similar symptoms, coupled with severe digestive issues. Imagine trying to perform your duties, to carry heavy timbers or hoist stone, when your body is racked with a debilitating fever, your muscles aching, and your mind clouded with delirium. Without modern diagnostics, the cause was often unknown, and the illnesses swept through the camps indiscriminately, often killing dozens, halting work, and adding to the climate of fear. There were no modern vaccines, no effective treatments, no antibiotics like the miracle drugs you can get at any pharmacy in a modern American city like Miami. Florida, medical care was rudimentary at best, often involving superstitious remedies, bloodletting, or painful, ineffective procedures. It's like trying to fight a war against an invisible enemy when you're already exhausted and armed with nothing but a stick. Tuberculosis TB, often called consumption, was another silent killer that stalked these close quarters. Imagine a cough that lingers for weeks, then months, growing deeper, more rattling. You might lose weight, feel perpetually tired, and experience night sweats. In the damp, unventilated conditions of the barracks, where one infected person coughed and sneezed, the airborne bacteria spread effortlessly. Once one worker contracted it, it was only a matter of time before others followed. The illness slowly consumed you, leaving you weak, emaciated, and eventually, if you were lucky, sent home to die. Or worse, succumbing in the cold, impersonal infirmary. If the construction site even had one. A common historical truth is that infectious diseases such as typhus, typhoid fever, dysentery, and tuberculosis were major causes of morbidity and mortality among medieval laborers, including those on cathedral construction sites. The combination of poor sanitation, inadequate nutrition, cramped living conditions, and limited medical knowledge created an environment highly conducive to widespread outbreaks and a reduced life expectancy for these workers. Historians still widely debate the precise contribution of each disease to the overall mortality rates of medieval workforces, as diagnostic methods were rudimentary and records incomplete, making it challenging to establish definitive epidemiological data for individual projects. Even common ailments became serious problems. A simple cold in a body already weakened by constant fatigue and undernourishment, remember scraps and scarcity from Chapter 5, could easily turn into bronchitis or pneumonia, leaving you gasping for breath and too weak to lift a tool. A cut finger from a broken tool, or a minor burn from working with molten lead as some masons or roofers would, if not properly treated, and proper treatment was largely unavailable. With no antiseptics or sterile dressings, could fester, turn gangrenous, and lead to amputation, or worse, blood poisoning sepsis, a common cause of death in that era. There was no trip to urgent care or a pharmacy for antibiotics like the convenience you experience today in your suburb in Chicago, Illinois. You might receive a crude poultice from an older colleague, or a superstitious charm, but effective medical intervention was rare. The psychological toll of constant illness, both your own and that of your colleagues, was immense. You lived with the perpetual fear of falling ill, knowing that sickness could mean not only suffering, but also loss of employment and utter destitution. You saw your friends and colleagues sicken, perhaps die or be sent away, never to return. This created a pervasive sense of despair and helplessness, a chilling reminder of your own vulnerability. The construction site. despite its monumental ambition, became a cage where death was a constant, unseen guest. Far worse than worrying about catching a cold during flu season in a modern office building in New York City. The stress of the master builder's whip brutal hierarchy. Chapter 3, and the physical demands of the stone's heavy whisper. Endless labor. Chapter 1 further compromised the immune system. Chronic fatigue, emotional repression. A hint of what's to come in Chapter 7. And constant anxiety weakened your body's natural defenses, making you even more susceptible to every passing contagion. It's a vicious cycle where the very conditions of your labor actively undermine your ability to stay healthy, trapping you in a cycle of weakness and vulnerability. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about the unseen illness, disease, and despair is the curious phenomenon of the Mason's silent legacy, where, despite the high mortality rates from disease and accidents on cathedral construction sites, surviving masons and artisans often developed a unique, almost hardened immunity to common ailments due to constant exposure, transforming them into remarkably resilient, albeit chronically ill, individuals who carried the hidden, physiological scars of their trade for decades, making them strangely robust in a world where disease was a constant threat. Turning their very bodies into living archives of past plagues. Imagine yourself an aged master mason in a quiet village in rural Vermont, long retired from the grueling construction of the Grand Cathedral, still suffering from a chronic cough and aching joints, but possessing a strange, almost miraculous resistance to the seasonal flus that felled younger. Seemingly healthier men, your body a testament to the brutal, selective pressures of a lifetime spent in the crucible of disease. A truly poignant, if biologically grim, survival story. It truly sucked to realize that your body had to endure so much just to achieve a basic level of immunity, transforming you into a walking chronicle of past plagues, even if you managed to survive an illness. The recovery was often slow and incomplete. There was no proper convalescence, no time to fully regain your strength. You were expected back to work as soon as you could stand, often pushed beyond your limits, making you more prone to relapse or lingering weakness. Your body simply never fully recovered, carrying the scars of past illnesses. A constant reminder of the fragility of your health. Chronic pain, persistent coughs, and impaired mobility were common companions for those who survived the onslaught of disease, further diminishing their quality of life and their ability to perform demanding physical labor. The economic consequences of illness were devastating. If you were too sick to work, you lost your meager pay, leading to immediate financial hardship for yourself and any dependents. Prolonged illness could mean permanent dismissal, plunging you into utter destitution. There were no social safety nets, no long-term disability support. Your only hope was charity, or to become a burden on your already struggling family. The fear of illness, therefore, was not just a fear of physical suffering, but a fear of complete social and economic ruin, a terror that would be utterly foreign to someone with robust health insurance and sick leave in a modern American city like San Francisco. California. The story of the unseen illness, disease, and despair is a chilling reminder of how profoundly our health is impacted by our living conditions, our nutrition, and our access to care. The high mortality rates and chronic suffering among medieval laborers building cathedrals were not just random occurrences. They were a direct consequence of a social system that prioritized monumental construction over basic human dignity and well-being. This historical reality underscores the critical need for public health reforms, sanitation, and accessible medical care that would eventually benefit all of society. So, as you lay in your own comfortable, clean bed tonight, breathing easily, perhaps feeling a minor sniffle that you know will pass, take a moment to reflect on the immense privilege of modern healthcare and sanitation, the absence of pervasive disease, the availability of clean water and good food, the quiet confidence in modern medicine. These are direct legacies of centuries of grim struggle against the unseen illness. Rest well, knowing that countless silent battles were fought and lost, so that you might live in a world where disease is largely a problem to be solved, not a constant, terrifying companion. Let's gently return from the pervasive, often fatal reality of the unseen illness, disease, and despair, where sickness relentlessly stalked the lives of medieval cathedral builders. If Chapter 6 explored the grim physical toll of disease, tonight we'll delve into an even deeper, more insidious form of suffering, the systematic suppression of emotion and the profound lack of personal expression. We're going to explore the heartbreaking reality of no rest for the weary, perpetual exhaustion, where the demands of colossal construction forced workers to suppress their true feelings, to maintain an impenetrable facade of stoic endurance, turning their inner lives into a hidden landscape of unspoken pain and quiet desperation, ultimately driving them to an exhaustion that permeated their very souls. Imagine yourself, now, a seasoned stonemason, perhaps nearing middle age, working on a towering Gothic masterpiece in what would eventually become the vibrant city of St. Louis, Missouri, or a sprawling, ambitious mission in colonial California. You've endured decades of the stone's heavy whisper, endless labor. Remember that brutal toil from Chapter 1 and survived the ever-present dangers of beneath the mason's boot. Hazardous conditions, those daily perils from Chapter 2. You've learned to navigate the brutal hierarchy, the relentless control from Chapter 3, and stretch your meager pay. The paltry sums from Chapter 4 to survive on bread and blight, the dismal food from Chapter 5. And you've fought off the omnipresent threat of unseen illness, the grim reality from Chapter 6. Yet, there's another insidious enemy that gnaws at your spirit, the relentless, bone-deep weariness that never truly leaves you. This is the pervasive, soul-crushing reality of no rest for the weary, perpetual exhaustion, where the very notion of genuine rest, of mental or emotional recuperation, is a distant, unattainable luxury, leaving your spirit as battered as your body. The physical demands alone would lead to profound exhaustion. We're talking about 16-hour days, sometimes more. 6 days a week, often from dawn till dusk, with rudimentary lighting for evening work if the project was behind schedule. There were no mandated breaks, no 8-hour shifts, no overtime pay like the regulations you might find in a modern construction union in New York City. You were expected to work continuously, hauling stones, chipping away at rock, climbing scaffolding, swinging heavy tools, all day long. Your muscles ached constantly, your joints throbbed, and your entire body screamed for respite. This wasn't just being tired after a long day, this was a deep, cumulative fatigue that permeated every fiber of your being, never allowing your body to fully recover. It's like running a marathon every single day for years on end, and never being allowed to cross the finish line. The living conditions exacerbated this exhaustion, sleeping in cramped, often unheated or poorly ventilated barracks. As we touched upon in below-stairs confines, those tiny shared spaces back in our servant narrative, and similarly applicable here, with dozens of other sweaty, coughing, often snoring workers, provided little opportunity for truly restorative sleep. The constant noise of the construction site, even after hours, might echo in your ears. The worry about your precarious existence, your meager pay, and the ever-present threat of unseen illness kept your mind racing. Preventing true rest, your sleep was fragmented, shallow, and insufficient, leaving you feeling as tired when you woke as when you finally collapsed onto your straw pallet. A common historical truth is that medieval laborers, particularly those involved in demanding projects like cathedral construction, endured exceptionally long working hours with minimal rest periods, leading to chronic physical and mental exhaustion. This perpetual state of fatigue significantly contributed to their vulnerability to accidents, illness, and a generally diminished quality of life. Historians still widely debate the precise impact of chronic sleep deprivation on the cognitive and physical performance of medieval workforces. As direct physiological studies are impossible, leaving much to inference from historical accounts of daily routines and observed health outcomes, beyond physical fatigue, there was a profound mental and emotional exhaustion. the constant vigilance required on a dangerous construction site, the need to avoid accidents, the pressure to meet quotas, and the fear of the master builder's wrath created immense psychological strain. You had to remain alert, focused, and precise, even when your body screamed for rest and your mind felt clouded by weariness. This mental strain compounded the physical exhaustion, leading to a pervasive sense of being perpetually drained, both physically and spiritually. It's like trying to solve complex mathematical equations while simultaneously running on a treadmill, an impossible and ultimately self-defeating endeavor. The lack of personal time, of any true leisure or opportunity for mental escape, contributed significantly to this exhaustion. There were no weekends off to unwind, no hobbies to pursue, no comfortable evenings spent with loved ones in your own private space. Your life was work, and then a brief, unfulfilling attempt at sleep before the next day of work began. This relentless cycle left no room for emotional processing, for personal reflection, or for simply being. Your identity became intertwined with your labor, leaving little room for a separate inner life. This constant suppression of individual agency, this demand for unthinking execution, was profoundly dehumanizing. It's akin to a factory worker in a rigid 19th century industrial plant in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, whose life was solely defined by the whistle's call, with no time for anything beyond the raw demands of production. Grief, anger, frustration, and joy. All these emotions had to be suppressed. If a loved one died, perhaps a parent or a sibling back home, you might receive the devastating news in a curt message. You would feel the crushing weight of sadness, a profound sense of loss. Yet, you had to continue with your duties, lifting stone, carving intricate details, as if nothing had happened. There was no time for mourning, no space for tears, no permission to express your grief. To break down, to show such weakness, could jeopardize your position. The unspoken rule was clear: your personal life, your personal pain, had no place in the service of the cathedral. This was a form of emotional exhaustion, where the sheer effort of maintaining a stoic facade consumed immense internal energy. It's like being an actor on a stage, constantly performing a role, even when your heart is breaking, knowing the show must go on. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed detail about no rest for the weary. Perpetual exhaustion is the curious phenomenon of the stone carver's trance, where, amidst the relentless noise and physical demands of the cathedral construction site, highly skilled masons, particularly those engaged in intricate carving or repetitive, precise tasks, would sometimes enter a deep, almost meditative state of intense focus, effectively shutting out the external chaos and their own physical discomfort, allowing them to continue working for hours on end, a rare, self-induced form of mental escape that bordered on a trance-like state, temporarily alleviating the overwhelming exhaustion, but deepening their overall emotional isolation. Imagine yourself hunched over a block of limestone in the bustling construction yard of a grand European cathedral, or a nascent early American equivalent in Savannah, Georgia, the cacophony of hammers and shouting all around you. Yet you are utterly lost in the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of your chisel, your mind emptied of all thought, your body moving almost autonomously, entering a strange, almost hypnotic state of intense concentration that allowed you to temporarily forget the aching exhaustion. A truly bizarre coping mechanism. It truly sucked to have to induce a near-trance state just to get through the workday, turning your skilled labor into a desperate form of self-hypnosis to escape the physical and mental torment, the constant suppression of anger and frustration, inevitable emotions when dealing with demanding master builders or difficult colleagues, had to be ruthlessly managed. The injustice of meager pay or the endless cycle of unseen illness might fill you with rage, but it had to be buried deep. Any outburst, any disrespectful word, any open display of discontent meant instant dismissal and a ruined reputation, making it impossible to find future work. This constant bottling up of powerful emotions created immense internal pressure. leading to chronic stress and often physical ailments, as the body bore the burden that the mind could not express. This self-censorship, this constant internal battle, and it was another layer of profound exhaustion. A psychological weight that never truly lifted. It's a bit like holding your breath for years, constantly suppressing a scream, feeling the pressure build up inside. Even moments of joy were often muted or quickly extinguished. A rare visit from family, a successful completion of a particularly difficult section of carving, or a brief celebration of a feast day. These moments of respite were fleeting. You were quickly reminded of your station, of the work that still lay ahead, and of the precariousness of your joy, the weight of responsibility, the pervasive exhaustion, and the strict societal expectations ensured that true, uninhibited happiness was a rare and often guilt-ridden indulgence. The psychological impact of this perpetual exhaustion and emotional repression was profound. Chronic stress, anxiety, and depression were undoubtedly common, though rarely acknowledged or recorded in historical documents. Workers would suffer in silence, their inner turmoil masked by stoic expressions and efficient movements. The lack of emotional outlets, the inability to process trauma or grief, and the constant pressure to conform to an unnatural standard of stoicism created a fertile ground for mental anguish. This silent, invisible epidemic of the soul was far more widespread than any physical ailment. A constant gnawing at the spirit that would make a modern therapist in California gasp. The consequences of this pervasive exhaustion were often physical. Unexpressed stress can manifest as headaches, digestive issues, chronic pain, and a weakened immune system, exacerbating the vulnerability to the unseen illness. Chapter 6. The body bore the burden of the emotions the mind could not release, turning the self into a silent battleground. This constant state of being tired, both physically and mentally, chipped away at their longevity, turning what was already a dangerous profession into one that literally consumed their very life force. The legacy of no rest for the weary perpetual exhaustion is a stark reminder of the dehumanizing aspects of extreme labor demands and rigid social stratification. It highlights how powerful societal norms and economic pressures can dictate not only outward behavior, but also the very internal experience of individuals. This historical reality underscores the importance of work-life balance, mental health awareness, the right to emotional expression, and the value of personal space and autonomy in modern society. Whether you're working in a bustling office in Chicago, Illinois, or managing a quiet household in rural Oregon, the silent suffering of countless medieval cathedral builders, forced to bury their tears and their weariness, played an unseen role in shaping our understanding of human dignity and the fundamental right to rest, to feel, and to simply be ourselves. Let's gently return from the bone-deep, soul-crushing weariness of no rest for the weary perpetual exhaustion, where the demands of medieval cathedral building stripped workers of true respite and emotional freedom. If Chapter 7 explored the internal burden of endless fatigue and suppression, tonight we'll delve into the fascinating, often surprising ways these seemingly powerless individuals found to reclaim tiny fragments of their autonomy. Despite the pervasive control and brutal conditions, we're going to explore the quiet defiance of whispers in the stone's subtle resistance, where small, often unseen acts of subversion allowed individuals to assert their humanity in a system designed to strip it away, turning mundane chores into miniature acts of quiet revolution, leaving their mark not just on the edifice, but on the very spirit of human resilience. Imagine yourself, now, an aging, anonymous laborer, perhaps hauling stones from the quarry to a colossal cathedral project in what would become the vibrant metropolis of New York City, or a grand early colonial church being built in Charleston, South Carolina. You are part of a vast, almost ant-like collective, your individual identity seemingly swallowed by the monumental task. The Master Builder's whip, remember that relentless control from Chapter 3 dictates your every move. Your meager pay, the paltry sum from Chapter 4, barely sustains you through bread and blight. The dismal food from Chapter 5, and your body is constantly under threat from hazardous conditions. The daily perils from Chapter 2, An Unseen Illness. The grim reality from Chapter 6. Yet, even amidst this overwhelming oppression, a tiny spark of defiance flickers within you. This is the pervasive, subtle reality of whispers in the stone. Subtle resistance, where dignity is salvaged in the smallest, most imperceptible acts, and conformity is sometimes merely a facade for a deeper, quiet rebellion. One of the most common forms of covert resistance was slacking and deliberate inefficiency, not outright refusing to work, which would lead to immediate and severe punishment, but finding tiny ways to slow down, to prolong a task, or to exert just a little less effort than demanded. Perhaps you take an extra few moments to sharpen your chisel when the foreman isn't looking, or you deliberately choose a slightly more cumbersome route when hauling a block of stone. Maybe you misunderstand a complex instruction, forcing a repetition or clarification, thereby buying yourself a few minutes of respite. These were not acts of laziness, but deliberate, albeit subtle, rebellions against the relentless pace of the stone's heavy whisper. Endless labor, our starting point in Chapter 1. It's like a tiny, unspoken strike, where the tools of labor become instruments of quiet protest. Imagine being a cog in a vast, impersonal machine, and subtly, almost imperceptibly, introducing a tiny amount of friction, just enough to feel a sense of control, but not enough to break the machine. Another potent form of covert resistance was gossip and rumor. While dangerous if discovered, the sharing of whispered secrets and grievances was a vital psychological outlet. In the cramped, communal living spaces, workers would often share unflattering stories about the master builder, mock the eccentricities of the clergy, or vent their frustrations about the harsh conditions. This communal act of talking back in secret, of subverting the rigid rules of the master builder's whip through shared scorn, created a sense of solidarity and allowed for a release of pent-up anger and resentment. These whispers were a powerful, albeit informal, communication network, creating a shared understanding of their collective plight and fostering a sense of camaraderie against a common oppressor. It's like a secret forum where everyone can anonymously vent about their terrible boss, building a community of shared suffering and unspoken rebellion. A common historical truth is that, despite the rigid control and punitive environment on medieval construction sites, laborers frequently engaged in various forms of covert resistance, ranging from subtle acts of defiance like slacking or petty appropriation of resources, to the more impactful spread of gossip and information. These actions, while rarely leading to overt rebellion, served as crucial mechanisms for psychological survival and the preservation of individual agency within an otherwise oppressive system. Historians still widely debate the true extent to which these individual acts of resistance were conscious, collective efforts towards systemic change, or primarily isolated coping mechanisms for personal survival, as their inherent covert nature makes conclusive evidence difficult to ascertain from the limited historical records. Petty theft was another widespread, albeit desperate, form of resistance. Given the meager wages and the scarcity of food, taking small items for personal use was common. A piece of leftover food, a handful of nails, a length of discarded rope, or even a few valuable tools for personal side projects. These were not grand thefts, but small acts of appropriation, reclaiming what was implicitly denied to them. This wasn't always driven by malicious intent, but often by sheer necessity, or a subtle sense of entitlement, given the immense labor they performed for so little compensation. It was a silent argument against the unfairness of their economic reality, a way of balancing the scales, however slightly, between their immense output and their paltry reward. Imagine taking a few extra packets of sugar or a handful of napkins from a fast food restaurant. Not because you desperately need them, but because you feel a subtle sense of reclaiming something from a system that undervalues your labor. Information control was a surprisingly powerful form of covert resistance, particularly for those in positions that granted them access to sensitive details. Workers, especially those involved in transporting materials or interacting with various levels of the hierarchy, were privy to an immense amount of information about the project delays in funding, quarrels among the patrons, technical difficulties, or even personal scandals involving the master builder. This knowledge was a hidden currency. While rarely used overtly, the knowing glance, the subtle omission of details when questioned, or the strategic sharing of information with trusted colleagues could be a powerful, unspoken manipulation of their employers. They held the power to subtly influence perceptions or even sow discord, a silent threat that underscored their unexpected influence, however rarely it was overtly deployed. It's like being a low-level intelligence operative who gains access to classified information, and while you can't start a revolution, you can subtly nudge events through carefully chosen leaks to trusted allies. The creation of informal networks and mutual aid societies among workers, both within a single construction site and between different projects, was another vital form of resistance. These networks, built on trust and shared experience, provided a sense of community and mutual support that was often denied by the formal hierarchy and the brutal competition for work. They shared job leads, gave advice on how to navigate difficult foremen, offered comfort during times of unseen illness, and sometimes even provided a safe haven or financial assistance for an injured or dismissed colleague. These were underground railroads of empathy and solidarity, helping individuals survive the isolation and harshness of their lives. It's like a secret union forming in the shadows, not to strike, but simply to exist, support each other, and survive together against overwhelming odds. A model later adopted by early immigrant communities, building new lives in burgeoning American cities like Philadelphia or New Orleans. A fascinating yet rarely discussed detail about whispers in the stone. Subtle resistance is the curious phenomenon of the apprentice's hidden signature, where, in defiance of the anonymity of their labor and the strict directives of their masters, young, often frustrated apprentices would sometimes secretly carve tiny, almost imperceptible personal marks, symbols, or even crude caricatures of their masters in obscure, high-up, or otherwise hidden sections of the cathedral's stone, turning the monumental structure into a vast, unacknowledged canvas for their tiny personal acts of artistic rebellion and a silent, enduring claim to their own identity within the colossal, impersonal project. Imagine yourself, a teenage apprentice in the dark recesses of a newly constructed vault, painstakingly chiseling a minuscule, unapproved symbol into a stone that will be hidden from view for centuries. A private act of defiance that makes you feel, for a fleeting moment, like a true artist, leaving your indelible secret mark on a building that will outlive kingdoms. A truly poignant act of self-assertion against overwhelming anonymity. It truly sucked to have to find such a tiny, hidden way to express your individuality, where even your signature was a subversive act that could only exist in the shadows. Feigning ignorance or clumsiness was a subtle art of resistance that simultaneously frustrated their superiors and provided a brief respite from constant, precise work. A laborer might misunderstand an overly complex instruction, leading to a delay that was attributed to incompetence rather than defiance. Or they might accidentally drop a non-essential tool or cause a minor, easily fixable setback. This could result in a scolding or a fine, but it also slowed down the relentless pace of work, frustrated the employer, and provided a brief moment of quiet thought or physical rest. It was a way of pushing back against impossible demands, a passive-aggressive act that allowed a worker to momentarily assert control over their own pace and efficiency, even if it risked reprimand. It's like a child deliberately mishearing their parents to buy themselves an extra few minutes of playtime, but with much higher stakes and the potential for real, physical punishment. The preservation of traditional craft knowledge and techniques, often passed down orally and through direct apprenticeship, also represented a subtle form of resistance against the purely top-down, master builder-centric vision. While the master builder dictated the overall design, the practical knowledge of how to build, the minute details of stone cutting, joinery, and lifting often resided with the experienced journeymen and master masons. This practical expertise gave them a subtle power, a quiet authority that the master builder, for all his theoretical knowledge, could not entirely usurp. Their collective skill was indispensable, providing them with a degree of leverage that they could wield implicitly through their tacit cooperation or subtle delay. The psychological impact of these acts of covert resistance, however small, was immense. They provided a crucial outlet for frustration, a means of preserving a shred of dignity and agency in a life largely devoid of it. These quiet acts of defiance, though unseen and unacknowledged by the powerful, were essential for maintaining sanity and a sense of self in an oppressive system. They were tiny victories in a war where outright rebellion was impossible, allowing workers to assert their humanity in the face of constant dehumanization. They served as a silent reminder that even when voices are silenced, the human spirit finds a way to resist, to adapt, and to quietly, persistently, demand its due. This subtle, pervasive undercurrent of whispers in the stone. Subtle resistance tells a powerful story about the resilience of the human spirit. It shows that even in the most controlled and seemingly powerless environments, individuals will find ways to push back, to assert their will, and to reclaim fragments of their autonomy. These acts of quiet defiance, though rarely recorded in official histories, were the silent heartbeats of a hidden struggle, a testament to the enduring human desire for freedom and dignity, no matter how small the expression. The legacy of these whispered rebellions reminds us that even when voices are silenced, the human spirit finds a way to resist, to adapt, and to quietly, persistently demand its due. Whether you're observing a contemporary labor dispute in a factory in South Carolina, or considering the subtle forms of resistance in any modern, highly structured environment, let's gently return from the subtle, yet powerful, world of whispers in the stone. Subtle resistance were tiny acts of defiance allowed medieval builders to reclaim fragments of their dignity in a stifling, dangerous environment. If Chapter 8 explored the quiet ways they pushed back, tonight we'll delve into their deepest longings, the fervent hopes that kept them going amidst the endless toil and emotional repression. We're going to explore the poignant reality of Beyond the Spire. Dreams of legacy, contemplating the aspirations for a life beyond mere survival, the desire to leave an enduring mark, and the hope for a better future for their descendants. However distant or unattainable those dreams might have been, imagine yourself now, an aging master mason, perhaps in your 50s or 60s, having spent your entire adult life, from your youth in a small rural town in Virginia to your current location near the bustling, ambitious construction site in London, or if we imagine it in a burgeoning early American context, a similarly grand civic building taking shape in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Your hands are gnarled, your back permanently stooped, and your lungs ache from decades of stone dust and damp conditions. You know, deep in your bones, that you will likely never see the last spire of this colossal cathedral completed. Your own life will end long before its final capstone is laid. Yet, as you meticulously carve a delicate piece of tracery, or carefully supervise the placement of a heavy arch, a profound thought stirs within you. This is the pervasive, often heartbreaking reality of Beyond the Spire dreams of legacy, where the hope for an enduring mark, a testament to your life's work, and the yearning for a better existence for those who come after you, provided a vital, unspoken motivation against the crushing weight of servitude and inevitable mortality. For many, the most immediate dream of legacy was simply to see their craftsmanship endure. Imagine spending decades perfecting a particular carving technique, or developing a unique method for lifting heavy stones. You poured your skill, your knowledge, and your very essence into the building. While your name might never be recorded, the intricate pattern you carved into a column, the sturdy joint you crafted in a timber beam, or the subtle curve you imparted to an arch would stand for centuries. This anonymous artistry, this silent testament to your personal skill, was a profound source of pride. It was a form of immortality, a way of ensuring that a part of you, your effort, your talent, would outlive your mortal coil and stand as a witness to your life. Far more enduring than any fleeting modern fame on a social media platform in Los Angeles. California. Beyond personal craftsmanship, there was the aspiration for generational continuity. Many trades, like masonry and carpentry, were passed down from father to son or master to apprentice. Imagine teaching your own son the precise swing of the mallet, the feel of the stone, the secrets of the trade. Your dream was not just for yourself, but for your lineage. You hoped that your children and their children would continue to find work in this honorable, albeit grueling, profession. Perhaps they would even rise higher in the brutal hierarchy. Remember Chapter 3, becoming master masons themselves, gaining more respect and a slightly better life than you endured on meager pay. Chapter 4, this continuity was a form of legacy, a hope that your family's skill and dedication would contribute to the grand, ongoing saga of building. It's like a family farm in rural Iowa being passed down through generations, each adding their own sweat and toil to the land, hoping the next generation will continue the tradition, but with stone instead of soil. A common historical truth is that medieval cathedral builders, despite their often anonymous roles, left an indelible legacy through their craftsmanship, contributing significantly to the architectural and engineering marvels that have endured for centuries. For many, this enduring physical testament to their labor, and the hope for their craft to continue through their descendants, provided a profound sense of purpose and a form of personal immortality. Historians still widely debate the extent to which individual masons consciously instilled personal meaning into their anonymous contributions, as direct testimonies are scarce, making it challenging to definitively ascertain their specific psychological motivations beyond general observations of craftsmanship and guild traditions. For some, the dream was simply to achieve a secure old age and a dignified burial. Given the hazardous conditions. Chapter 2 and the ever-present threat of unseen illness. Chapter 6. Merely surviving to old age was a profound achievement. You dreamed of a time when your body, broken by labor, could finally rest, perhaps supported by your children or through the meager benefits of a guild. You hoped for a proper Christian burial, a small plot of land in consecrated ground, rather than being simply cast into a pauper's grave or an unmarked pit like so many who perished on the construction site. This simple aspiration for peace and respect in death, a final acknowledgement of a life of hard work, was a powerful motivator against the despair of perpetual exhaustion from Chapter 7. It's a bit like someone in modern society simply hoping to retire comfortably and have a respectful funeral. A basic human desire that was a monumental aspiration in their time. Then there were the truly ambitious dreams to become a master builder yourself, or to contribute to a groundbreaking architectural innovation. Imagine a young journeyman, perhaps carving a difficult piece of a flying buttress, secretly envisioning a new way to distribute weight, or a more efficient method of hoisting stone. These dreams, often kept secret due to the rigid hierarchy and fear of reprisal, represented a profound yearning for recognition, for intellectual contribution, and for personal achievement beyond mere execution. While rare, the stories of a few who rose from humble beginnings to become renowned master builders fueled these hidden aspirations, providing a glimmer of hope for social mobility in a largely static society. It's like an aspiring engineer working on a bridge project in contemporary Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, secretly sketching designs for a revolutionary new type of suspension cable. Driven by a passion that transcends their current role, for many, their legacy was tied to their spiritual contribution. They were, after all, building a house for God, a physical manifestation of divine glory. This deeply held religious belief could transform the endless, brutal labor into an act of profound devotion. You might believe that every swing of your hammer, every stone you cut, was a prayer, an offering to secure your place in the afterlife. The cathedral itself was a monument to faith, and by contributing to it, you became a part of something eternal. something greater than yourself. This spiritual purpose provided immense solace and meaning, allowing many to endure suffering that would otherwise be unbearable. It's a powerful faith that allows someone to endure incredible hardship, much like the early Puritan settlers building their first churches in the wilderness of colonial Massachusetts. Seeing their labor as a direct path to divine favor, a fascinating, yet rarely discussed detail about Beyond the Spire. Dreams of Legacy is the curious phenomenon of the hidden dedication stone, where, despite strict rules against personal inscriptions, groups of masons or individual craftsmen, on particularly significant or challenging sections of the cathedral, would sometimes discreetly carve tiny, almost indecipherable symbols or a single, nearly invisible initial of their collective or personal names into the underside or interior facing of a stone. Knowing it would be forever sealed within the wall, a silent, defiant act of collective ownership, and a subtle claim to their enduring contribution that would be unseen by the patrons, but known only to them in the very structure itself. Imagine yourself, an exhausted master carpenter in the dim light of a newly framed roof, using a small, sharp chisel to carve a microscopic symbol, shared only among your close-knit team, into the hidden side of a massive timber beam. Knowing that this secret mark was your generation's quiet claim to a piece of this monumental achievement, a tiny, defiant whisper that would echo through the centuries, unseen but undeniably present. It truly sucked to have to hide your own name in a secret corner, knowing that your immense contribution would otherwise be forgotten by history. Furthermore, the dream of legacy often extended to the hope for a more just world for future generations. While they lived under the brutal hierarchy and endured meager pay, many laborers hoped that their children or their grandchildren would live in a world where such extreme hardship was not the norm. They built not just for the glory of God or the power of the church, but also in a quiet, unspoken way, for a future where labor was more valued and human dignity more universally respected. Their suffering became a silent prayer for progress, a foundation upon which future generations could build better lives, even if they themselves would never witness that transformation. This long-term vision, this hope for systemic improvement, provided a profound sense of purpose that transcended their immediate, miserable circumstances. The psychological impact of these dreams, however fleeting, was immense. They provided a crucial outlet for aspiration, a means of preserving a shred of hope and personal meaning in a life largely devoid of it. These silent dreams, though rarely articulated, were essential for maintaining sanity and a sense of self in an oppressive system. They were tiny victories in a world where grand triumphs were rare, allowing workers to assert their humanity in the face of constant dehumanization. They connected the individual to something larger than themselves, whether it was the enduring power of faith, the continuity of family craft, or the faint glimmer of a better future for humanity. The paths to realizing these dreams were incredibly narrow. The societal structures, the economic realities, and the sheer physical toll meant that most dreams of individual glory or significant social mobility remained just that, dreams. Yet the very act of dreaming, of yearning for something more, was a profound act of human resilience, a quiet refusal to be entirely defined by their circumstances. It allowed them to endure the perpetual exhaustion and the covert resistance. Chapter 8, with a sense of purpose beyond mere survival, connecting their brief, arduous lives to the enduring majesty of the cathedrals themselves. The legacy of Beyond the Spire. Dreams of legacy is a poignant reminder that, even in the most oppressive systems, the human spirit yearns for something more than mere existence. It highlights the power of hope, the driving force of aspiration, and the fundamental human desire to leave a meaningful mark on the world, however small or anonymous. This historical reality underscores the importance of recognizing the unseen contributions of countless individuals throughout history, whose silent dreams and immense labor laid the foundations for the comforts, freedoms, and opportunities we enjoy today. Whether you're admiring a centuries-old building in Europe or appreciating the foundational structures of a modern city like Boston. Massachusetts. The unseen dreams of medieval cathedral builders, yearning for their work to endure and for their descendants to thrive, helped to build not just stone monuments, but also the very concept of human progress itself. Let's gently return from the profound, often heartbreaking, realm of beyond the spire, dreams of legacy, where the faintest glimmer of an enduring mark or a better future sustained spirits amidst a lifetime of servitude. If Chapter 9 explored their aspirations, tonight we'll finally step out of the shadows of the medieval construction site and into our own lives, reflecting on how those grim realities silently shape the comfortable world we inhabit today. We're going to explore modern Echo's unseen foundations, contemplating the quiet, unseen legacy of an era of immense hardship that underpins so many of the conveniences we now take for granted. From the sturdy buildings that surround us to the very notion of workplace safety and individual rights. Imagine yourself, now, winding down your evening in your own home in a quiet suburb of Denver, Colorado, or your cozy apartment in New York City. The lights are soft. Perhaps the gentle hum of your refrigerator fills the room. You've had a long day, perhaps a busy one at work, or a relaxed one at home. You might think nothing of it as you grab a glass of water from the tap, the clear liquid flowing effortlessly. You might step into a warm shower, or simply sink into a comfortable couch, knowing your time is your own, and no foreman will summon you from your rest. This is the profound, yet often unacknowledged, reality of modern Echo's unseen foundations, where the misery of a past life of brutal labor silently transformed the very fabric of our daily existence. Building a foundation of comfort and safety we rarely pause to appreciate, think back to the relentless, unending toil of the stone's heavy whisper. Endless labor, our starting point in Chapter 1. Remember the grueling 16-hour days, the physical exhaustion, the constant chipping and hauling of stone by hand? Now, look around your own home, or the buildings you work in. Do you have power tools that slice through wood and stone with ease? Giant cranes that lift heavy beams to dizzying heights? And earth movers that reshape landscapes in hours? Not decades. These aren't just modern conveniences, they are direct descendants of the historical need to reduce manual labor, born from the recognition of the sheer, soul-crushing effort that once went into creating even basic structures. Every piece of heavy machinery, every automated process in modern construction is a quiet monument to the countless laborers whose bodies ached from similar, far more arduous tasks. It's like having a team of invisible, tireless giants doing your bidding, without any of the human cost. A truly freeing advance that underpins nearly every structure you inhabit, from a skyscraper in Chicago, Illinois, to a single-family home in rural Georgia. Consider the terrifying reality of beneath the mason's boot hazardous conditions, that chilling reality from Chapter 2. Remember the constant threat of falling from scaffolding hundreds of feet high, of being crushed by falling stone, of losing a limb to a crude tool, all without protective gear or medical care? Now, appreciate the safety regulations that govern modern construction sites. The hard hats, safety harnesses, steel-toed boots, safety netting, and stringent protocols that are commonplace today. The very concept of OSHA occupational safety and health administration regulations, of workers' compensation for injuries, and of medical care that can actually save a limb or prevent a fatal infection. These are all legacies of a long, hard-won battle against the brutal indifference to human life that once defined labor. The expectation that a worker should return home safely at the end of the day, a given in any developed nation, is a profound echo of the sacrifices made by those who faced daily peril without recourse. The absolute power and rigid control of the master builder's whip-brutal hierarchy. Chapter 3 comes into sharp relief when we consider our modern freedoms in the workplace. You have the right to speak your mind within reason, to report unsafe conditions, to join a union, to negotiate for fair treatment, and to leave a job you dislike without facing destitution or physical punishment. The notion of absolute, unquestioned authority, of constant surveillance, and of physical discipline in the workplace is largely foreign and unacceptable to most of us today. The modern workplace, while still having hierarchies, typically emphasizes professional boundaries, communication, and basic human dignity, a stark contrast to the almost feudal control wielded by a medieval master builder. Your ability to simply be a person with rights and a voice, without constant fear of reprisal, is a profound freedom that was denied to so many. It's a bit like living in a world where everyone has finally found their voice, after centuries of forced silence. And the sheer joy of that empowerment is palpable in every interaction. And the meager pay, that pathetic compensation from Chapter 4 and bread and blight famine, and disease, the dismal food, and widespread illness from Chapter 5. Think about your own financial autonomy. The ability to earn a living wage, to save money, to plan for retirement, to invest, to make choices about your career and future without immediate fear of destitution. Think about the abundance of safe, nutritious, and diverse food available in your local supermarket in a bustling city like San Francisco, California, or a quiet town in rural Vermont. The variety, the freshness, the safety, and the sheer quantity. These are not just economic advancements. They are fundamental shifts in human dignity, built on the historical struggles against poverty, exploitation, and food insecurity. Every time you open your pantry, enjoy a fresh meal, or receive your paycheck, you are experiencing the hard-won victories that generations before you could only dream of. A common historical truth is that the cumulative hardships endured by medieval cathedral builders, particularly the lack of personal autonomy, perilous working conditions, economic exploitation, and vulnerability to disease, inadvertently fueled the societal and technological advancements that ultimately led to improved standards of living. A greater emphasis on individual rights and public welfare in the modern era. These miserable lives served as a stark historical contrast that underscored the value of the comforts and freedoms we now possess. Historians still widely debate the precise causal link between the widespread suffering of these laborers and specific public health. Labor, or engineering reforms, as social change is often a complex interplay of many factors, but the undeniable human cost certainly played a significant role in highlighting systemic injustices and sparking a slow but steady demand for progress. Even the simple act of experiencing your feelings, free from the crushing weight of no rest for the weary perpetual exhaustion. Chapter 7 is a profound comfort. The ability to grieve, to laugh, to vent frustration, to show affection, to seek therapy or mental health support. These are fundamental aspects of human well-being. Modern society, increasingly aware of the importance of mental health, encourages emotional expression and provides avenues for coping. A stark contrast to an era where such openness was a dangerous liability. The very freedom to be emotionally authentic, to connect genuinely with others, to acknowledge and process your pain, is a testament to how far we've come. It's like discovering you can finally breathe deeply, after holding your breath for 100 years, feeling the air fill your lungs with freedom and genuine emotion, the small acts of whispers in the stone's subtle resistance. Chapter 8 also resonate deeply with our modern world. While we have formal means of protest, labor unions, and civil rights movements today, the underlying human desire for agency and dignity remains constant. The impulse to subtly push back against unfairness, to find a voice even when silenced, to leave a small, personal mark on a larger, impersonal system. This is an inherent part of the human spirit. Their tiny rebellions, though unseen by their masters, were the silent seeds of a future where overt forms of resistance and the assertion of individual rights could eventually bloom. They remind us that even when grand gestures are impossible, the human spirit finds quiet ways to assert itself. A fascinating yet rarely discussed detail about modern Echo's unseen foundations is the curious phenomenon of the phantom chisel tap, where occasionally a modern architect or conservator While studying the ancient stones of a medieval cathedral, we'll discover a minuscule, almost imperceptible tool mark, or a faint, hidden symbol in an obscure corner of a stone. A tiny, personal signature left by an anonymous medieval mason centuries ago. A silent whisper from the past that transcends time and space, revealing a profound human desire to leave an enduring, albeit hidden, mark on the monumental work that consumed their lives. Imagine yourself, a meticulous architectural historian, in the quiet solitude of a grand European cathedral, running your gloved hand over a rough-hewn stone in a dimly lit crypt, and feeling the faintest, almost invisible, indentation, a tiny, secret chisel mark, perhaps a symbol of a forgotten guild or a lonely mason's personal insignia, a direct, unspoken communication from a human being who lived 1,000 years ago, asserting their individuality against the crushing anonymity of their labor. It truly sucked that their only lasting personal mark often had to be a secret, hidden whisper, visible only to the most discerning eye, a testament to the profound constraints they faced. And finally, the dreams of legacy. Chapter 9, the yearning beyond the spire. Your ability to choose your own career, to marry whom you please, to travel, to pursue an education, to build your own home, to define your own destiny. These are the very freedoms that countless medieval builders yearned for, and often died without ever experiencing. The ease with which we pursue our aspirations, the open paths before us, are not accidents of history. They are the hard-won dividends of generations who struggled against systems of oppression, whose quiet dreams fueled a persistent, incremental push towards a more just and equitable world. Their enduring structures are not just monuments to faith. They are monuments to the human spirit's unwavering desire for progress and self-determination. So, as you lay in your own bed tonight, surrounded by the myriad comforts and freedoms of your modern life, take a moment to breathe deeply, to feel the softness of your sheets, the warmth of your home, the quiet hum of your appliances. These aren't just material possessions, they are echoes. Echoes of silent labor, of cramped quarters, of hidden tears, of meager meals, of unseen illnesses, and of profound, persistent dreams. They are the quiet legacy of why building a cathedral in the Middle Ages sucked. Let this understanding wash over you. Feel the quiet hum of your modern world, a world built on the foundations laid by countless, often unseen, acts of perseverance and sacrifice from those who came before. Rest easy, knowing that while the human journey is complex and often arduous, the spirit of adaptation and of resilience, even in its most disturbing forms, is an ancient, powerful part of who we are. It's the hidden strength that binds us to our ancestors, a gentle reminder that even in the darkest corners of history, human ingenuity and will always find a way to leave their indelible, yet often unseen, mark